for real. This is the real deal. How many pounds did you lose?
I lost 20 pounds in 21 days.
20 pounds in 21 days. So maybe, hey, forget Atkins, forget the keto diet, go on Naked and Afraid. You will guaranteed lose the weight.
You will lose weight, yeah.
Welcome back to another episode of the Making Magic podcast. I'm Sean J., your host, and I'm a professional magician, speaker, and 3D designer. And this is all about inspiring conversations with the movers, the shakers, the visionaries, and the makers, the wizards behind the curtain that make the magic for you. Now, if this is your first time tuning into the show, thank you so much for doing so. We put a lot of hard work into these shows. So if you're enjoying it, feel free to leave us a healthy review in the Apple Podcast app when you listen to this, or if you're watching on YouTube, like, comment, subscribe. You guys know what to do. So enough about that. I'd like to introduce you to my guests here, and this is a different kind of intro because I am not in my main podcast studio. I'm out in the wild with the birds, the bees, and the trees, and I have this thing here. What are we holding here? These are talking sticks, basically, to keep it themed and rustic with this environment that we're in. And my two guests that I'd like to introduce to you, they're childhood friends of mine. They're still my friends, but you guys, we grew up, like, you guys were right across the street from me, and I had no idea that they were going to turn into creative survivalists. They enjoy the challenge of surviving when put in these extreme situations, and they have a lot to share with us about the magic of being creative when you're stuck and you just feel like you can't escape, and whether it be a metaphor for your own life. If you feel like you can't break out, you can't escape, I think these guys have a lot to share that I think you'll find very interesting. So Kiah and Aosha we have here, and this is a duo interview, so I'm going to ask both of you, and you'll have a chance to think about this. I always like to open the show with a story, and I'd like you guys to tell me a story, and you guys also, I'll just add, I can't hide this, you're going to hear sounds like people are getting shot out here, but those are acorns that are falling from these trees,
Welcome to the country.
hitting the roofs of these country dwellings that are out here. So if you hear any pops, nobody's getting shot, it's the acorns. Okay, fine. So tell us a story about the very first survival situation you were ever put in, and how'd you get out of it? And this could be good, bad, or funny stories are always welcome.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start with that. So as a teenager, I did some survival training going out, both of us did, with some mentors of ours, and so we got prepared a little bit for the really primitive survival, just like living sort of more traditional ways and really simple lifestyle with not many tools. But for me, a survival situation can be a lot of different things. It can be that, but it can also just be a time when you're sort of afraid and unsure of the outcome of a situation. And so I think the first time that I really felt that was when I went to Alaska. I drove to Alaska when I was 19 from North Carolina, just big long trip, and just had a lot of really new experiences. And at one point on the trip, I went to this peak out there called Donahoe Peak, and it's right in between a couple of glaciers outside of the little town of McCarthy in Wrangell St. Elias National Park. And I was by myself and didn't really have any experience doing that sort of thing, but I thought, how hard can it be? I'll just go check it out, and I'm going to try to get to the top of this thing. So I crossed this glacier, wearing my crampons on boots that they weren't supposed to go on, and just kind of was safe enough, but a little bit out there for sure. Set up my tent at the base of this thing and started climbing. And it wasn't really technical. It was just sort of a scramble up some scree slopes at first. And I ended up getting a little more than halfway up and sort of realized that I was in a situation. It was getting very steep, and I just felt myself getting scared. I felt myself getting really uncomfortable, and the rocks were loose. I was sliding around a bit. I would try to grab onto things, and they would just kind of come off and, slide down the mountain. And so in that moment, I really had to focus my mind and focus my attention on every single step and everything that I was doing in that moment. And eventually made it to the top, ran out of food. I actually called my mom from the summit. I found service up there, and I was kind of like, hey, I'm kind of scared right now. Like, just wanted to say, hey, like, I'm fine, but like, I'm freaked out. Like, that was sketchy. And like I said, ran out of food. I think I had like a couple of cashews on the summit, and I came back down. It was a little bit easier. I could just kind of ride the ski slope down, and got back to my tent and was planning on hiking out because I was out of food. But I was too tired. I mean, I basically just collapsed when I got to my tent and had a little bit of salmon jerky made into soup to keep myself going, and then slept the night and left the next morning and made it back to my car. And yeah, so that was kind of my first real experience of like being scared, being really out there, and feeling like I had to draw from my inner skills and abilities to really survive and to make it through. So
Wow. And thank you for sharing. Kiah, do you have anything similar?
Nothing similar, because I don't really feel like in my life I've been in a survival situation involuntarily. I don't think I've ever been in a situation. I've been in situations where I was nervous or scared or something, but I don't know if I've ever been in a situation where, not by choice, I was put in a spot where I needed to figure out what to do to sort of stay safe and alive. I haven't done quite as much, climbing and adventure as Aosha has. I've done a little bit of that stuff with him, but I would say an experience that comes to mind for me is Grayson Highlands up in Virginia is one of my favorite places to go in the summer and in the fall and in the spring and in the winter. And in the winter, it's winter up there. There's lots of snow. It could be, a few inches, or it could be 3 feet of snow. And it can be really, really cold. And the day before Christmas Eve one year, I decided, hey, I'm going to go. I just need a night to myself. I'm going to go drive up there. I'm going to hike in. I'm going to build a snow cave. And I'm not going to bring my tent with me at all. I'm just going to go up there. I'm going to go with my clothes, and I'm just going to get in my sleeping bag, and I'm going to build a snow cave, and I'm going to crawl into it. And so I did. I spent, a couple of hours as the sun was going down, because I got there kind of late. I had work earlier that day. And I dug myself into the snow. I built blocks. I put them up around me. I tried to sort of make a structure where I could be sheltered from the wind. It was starting to get really cold and really windy. I think it was probably nearing 0 degrees Fahrenheit, maybe a little colder with the wind chill. And again, this was a voluntary situation, but I really found myself realizing that if I didn't get the snow cave built, then I was going to be in a bad situation, even though I put myself in this situation, and I knew that I could probably handle whatever came my way. So I ended up doing it and building a nice little snow cave, crawling up in there, and about halfway through the night, it started collapsing on me, which, I've never built a snow cave before, so I didn't know that that was a thing, because I was warming it up. It was quite nice in there. And it wasn't too bad. There wasn't a lot of snow, but I ended up sleeping most of the night there with just a little weight on me. But I put myself in that situation, and there were just moments there where I was feeling like, okay, if I don't succeed here, I'm going to be really cold and really unpleasant. And so I had to sort of force myself to take a skill that I maybe didn't even really know how to do. I was just like, I'm pretty sure I can figure out how to build a snow cave and just go for it and make it work. Yeah. And I felt like because of the skills I have, I was prepared, even though I didn't really know what I was doing.
Gotcha. So you, in your case, you voluntarily put yourself there as a challenge.
That's right. Yeah.
And I would say the recurring theme here for regardless of whether you voluntarily or involuntarily put yourself is like, so if you the overarching lesson here is by voluntarily putting yourself there, you gain preparation, because then you're not caught off guard, because you say, you volunteered to face your fears. Rather,
absolutely. Yeah. It's better to be prepared and then be in that situation and already know what to do, and have, instead of, doing it and having your car a few miles away, where if you really need to bail, you can bail. It's those folks out there, don't not have a safety net if you're practicing this stuff. Like, have a safety net.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's really important, and I think that creativity and resourcefulness is like a huge part of it, because you can plan for hours for something like that. But when you get out there, you don't get to decide what nature's going to do, right? And so I think that having a foundation of skills before you try those sort of things allows you to say, sort of like what Kiah said, I don't really know exactly what I'm getting into. I'd like a challenge, but I trust myself to figure it out. And I think that's a really key thing, and that's just comes from experience, and also being open to like learning new things in the moment. When you need to know them, you need to learn them. And those things stick with you so much more when you learn how to do that in a really tough situation. You're not just reading it in a book and practicing it in your backyard and going in and taking a hot shower, right? You're out there, and if you mess it up, you're not going to be happy, you know? And so I think that sparks a lot of motivation to be creative in those situations and be resourceful and really open-minded about your approach.
Agreed 100%. And it just seems like the timing is that the trees like to drop acorns when Aosha's talking. But this is live. This is happening right now. This is not scripted. This is just the way it is in the wild, and that's why we have to adapt, like we did actually with these talking sticks. There's a whole adaptation story that I could tell you all later. But regardless of all this uncontrollable things that we can't control, the one thing that we can control is the level of preparation prior to. And then what we can also control is how we respond to these situations.
Yes.
And even though you weren't planning to get into such a sticky situation, you were open, as you said, you were open to the possibilities rather than closing yourself off and just going, I don't know how to do it because I've never been here before, so I'm just going to give up.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, you have to put yourself in those unknown situations to grow and to learn. I mean, that's at least my experience in life. If I get in a tough situation and I just immediately pull the plug because I'm a little bit uncomfortable, I'm not going to learn a whole lot there, you know? You really have to put yourself out there more than you want to sometimes. You got to be safe. You got to think about that. You know, you don't want to overextend too much. But I think that's a mentality that not as many people have in this day and age, especially as far as outdoor skills and experiences. You know, if something feels uncomfortable, they may not want to even try it, you know. And I think that that's a shift in that could bring a lot of people a lot of good lessons and a lot of good skills.
And I think, too, it's good to have a balance of both. Just like what Kiah said, it's good to voluntarily put yourself in that situation as just like a lesson to help you.
Absolutely, yeah.
To help you
Super agree.
prepare. So then when you do a planned trip but then have something that isn't planned happen, then at least you have a foundation because you've done some type of preparation. You're not totally lost.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think that's, having a foundation is really key. And so, that would be something just to say to anyone who wants to get involved in this stuff, is don't just go push yourself to the nth degree right away without some frame of reference of what you might be getting into. Have a foundation of a little bit of experience and some skills so that you don't end up in a true survival situation where you're really, really not prepared and putting yourself in danger.
Exactly. Because then it literally is a matter of life and death. So very good life lessons to learn just from getting the yin and the yang in both sides to this approach and just your life experiences. So what was the reason actually now, Kiah, what was the reason why you voluntarily put yourself in this situation? Was it just all about having a personal challenge to want to overcome, to test yourself, or was there any other deeper reason for that?
Yes to all of that, really. Like, I think I do enjoy putting myself in uncomfortable situations, whether that, and at this point in my life with doing other things, and less time in the woods just because I'm working and all this stuff, putting myself in other situations in my life where I'm uncomfortable, social situations, things like that. I love that challenge of being in an unknown space. And in this case, like being up in the mountains there, I had a safety net. My car was just a couple miles away. If I was in a bad spot, I could have left and I would have been fine, But yeah, I think that's kind of a big part of it, is just challenging myself to grow in my life in different ways, and putting myself in a new situation where I'm like, I think I know how to do this, but I got to figure it out, is really fulfilling for me personally to then, go into that situation and come out fine or learn a lot. I mean, I learned a ton of stuff that one night. I mean, it was like a few hours, of like doing this, and then I was done. Also, I just wanted to get away. I wanted to be in a different space. I was going through some stuff, and I was just like, hey, like, I just need to, be in a different spot right now and go put myself. And for me, bringing myself out of my head and into my body usually involves challenge or involves something physical or putting myself into a situation where I'm forced to think about other things or just do other things or just feel other things. And so for me, that's like a really good and healthy escape from, just life in general, which is, I've lived a really wonderful life, but being able to go out and do something like that and add that aspect of, okay, cool, and I'm going to come out of this and actually learn something as well as, and I had a great time. Like, yeah, it was a little cold and, got wet a little bit and like it was fine. But coming out of it, the next day driving home on Christmas Eve, I was just like, man, I feel great. Like I'm a little tired, but like I did a fun thing and I learned a lot and I feel refreshed, So really it's all of the reasons, honestly, for me. And I have a commitment, like actually a real commitment in my life to continue to do things like that. Again, whether it's going and staying in a snow cave, that's almost an extreme, but again, just putting myself in a new social spot where I'm just like, I don't know these people, or I don't know this thing, or I'm a musician, I do a lot of music, getting on stage with someone I've never heard their music before and playing with them without knowing it. And those kind of things really fuel me a lot. And that goes along with the same sort of survivalist stuff where you're just putting yourself in a situation where you have unknowns, and then you get to use not only your skills, but just your ability to like actually slow down and think about stuff. And be able to just make a good decision, and that's almost a meditative thing in its own right. Yeah.
Well said.
Yeah.
Aosha, any driving reason why you're almost addicted to this craziness?
There's a couple. One that I more recently have felt really strongly about is when you go out into those situations and you're pushing your edges, right? That's the way that I phrase it. I have edges. I have an edge of where my comfort zone is. And when I push myself past that, you're stretching your mental being, right? It's like when you work out, you're tearing your muscles a little bit, or and it rebuilds you, or you lift a little bit more that one day, and then you can do that. You've done that. And I think the same applies for those other experiences where I'm going out into nature and challenging myself I always come out of it, if I've pushed myself, with more confidence, feeling like I know that I can do this now. I've had this new experience. And the other thing, especially these days in my life, that feels really important to me about doing those things is the contrast between doing that and then being home and being in a comfortable space. It makes me enjoy that so much more when I'm not just always in this rut of being comfortable and having stuff, prepared for me and right in front of me, and like being able to turn on the tap and
I totally agree with that.
When you go out, it creates a balance, and life is all about a balance. Having a positive relationship with things in your life is about a balance, right? And I think that can be applied to almost any aspect of life. If you're too far on one side of the spectrum of something, it's harder to appreciate it. And so for me, getting to experience those extremes and then come back to a more comfortable space makes that comfortable space like I'm way more stoked about it than I would be if I'm doing that every single day and every single day of the year. So that for me is a really big part of it. It has a lot of beauty in that sense of creating a different perspective and a nice contrast for all of the things in my life. And I think that's really valuable for me.
Very valuable, folks. Just in this couple opening questions here, I think you can understand that it's not just all about throwing yourself out there and doing it for fun and games, but you can learn not only so much about yourself as a person, but then I think something that both of you agreed upon and something that was important to remember is that it helps you appreciate like how spoiled we are as humans. And so if we rewind time and purposely put ourselves in those situations, you go, wow, I really do live a blessed life. Wow, I really am lucky to have, like you said, tap water.
Yeah, yep. I think it's such a good contrast. It's like something that I think a lot of people could really benefit from. If you're struggling with things in your day-to-day life, do something different. Find something that you don't feel comfortable doing. And then when you come back to your comfortable daily routine, it's gonna feel better. Like it's gonna feel like different. Maybe not always better, but it's gonna feel different, and it's gonna change things up. And I think that's almost always a really positive thing.
Yeah, it's like I think you also mentioned the metaphor of doing gym. Working out. You purposely put positive stress on your body so that your body's more prepared the next time, and it's less of a freak out moment because your body's been through something way worse already.
Yeah, exactly.
And the way that this can trickle down into the creative field, as far as like if you're a graphic designer, for instance, listening or watching this, it's the same principle, same life principle. So let's say you are a graphic designer, but you weren't out in the woods. Same thing holds true. Like by stretching your limits of whatever your skills are, of whatever you're doing with the computer to create graphic art, then when you get another project that's more simpler, well, it feels simple now because of the context. You've already experienced something far more challenging. You've already pushed yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, it applies to everything. It really does apply to everything. I think that's a great just sort of philosophy or whatever to have on your life, is just like, do that, and you will see how it affects you. You will see the positive in it, and it's very tangible.
Aosha, you have an inchworm on your microphone. You might want to move that little guy.
Ah,
Look at that.
there's an inchworm?
Cool. Yeah, it's very small.
There it is.
I'm going to leave it there.
Yeah, just leave it
it's
there.
fine. It'll enjoy the audio.
Not causing any problems.
Maybe the inchworm will whisper a bit of advice that we all need to hear.
Listen to some of
Hopefully.
the subtext here. Maybe you'll hear something.
It's the translator. Maybe it's translating for the animal kingdom.
Yes, that's what it's here for.
So clearly, you guys have learned a lot from your experiences in the wild, and not only so much from your first, but each one progressively probably gets easier. And knowing what you know now, after going through all of these crazy experiences that you have since childhood, right? Like, you've been running around outside, maybe not doing extreme stuff, but I would say, right, as young children, you were barefoot, running around in the dirt and just exploring, right?
Yeah, definitely more out there than a lot of kids, I think. Yeah, so if I could go back and sort of talk to myself or give myself some advice for getting into those sort of early situations that I was in that really forced me to, like, stretch my survival skills and to be uncomfortable. There's so much that I could say to myself, but I think that thinking about talking to myself or talking to somebody else who's getting into that, first of all, this may sound not that exciting, but be careful. I can think back on so many things that I would do, and I just didn't have the perspective that I really needed to be perfectly safe. I didn't think, nothing bad ever happened, so I didn't think about the consequences. But then you have a close call, or if you trip and bruise your knee when you're solo on some talus field somewhere up on a mountain, you could be in real big trouble. You could have a really big problem on your hands. And so I think that, any younger people especially who don't have the life experience to realize that consequences are real, that things happen and bad things can happen, is to just slow down and be really mindful with your decisions. And you will get to the point where you have the confidence to do something big, but you want to get there safely, So I think that for me, again, nothing bad ever happened, but in reflection of my younger self, if something bad had happened, I was not prepared for it, and things could have ended very badly.
Yeah.
And so I think I got lucky, but I think that's a big point to everybody who wants to get involved in pushing themselves, especially in the backcountry and especially in nature. That's a really big one.
And I'll just chime in really quick before it gets bounced to Kiah, that what you said about slowing down and being mindful, I remember you mentioning that when you were on Naked and Afraid, talking about, when they were interviewing you, about somebody was bailing and why have you succeeded so far? And I remember you saying something like, I just slowed everything down. Like I think it was something like Tanner or something cut his finger or cut his hand. And you were like, when I was cutting those trees or whatever, I was like really mindful and just like, where are my hands right now? Where's the blade right now? Because this is a blade, I only get one shot. And if I mess up my hand, we're screwed.
Yeah, that's a great example of seeing the consequences in something like that and realizing, like, okay, like, this stuff can happen, and you got to think about it. You got to be really mindful.
Especially when you're tired and have low blood sugar. Like, you need to do the extra step of, like, what am I doing? How am I doing it? How am I holding this thing? Where's my foot? Where's my hand? Where's my leg? Like, what's around me? Because it's that in those situations, when it matters the most, it's easiest to forget because you're exhausted or fatigued or hungry or whatever might be going on. I agree with that completely. Like, it's a really important thing. And like what you said, Sean, like slowing down. If you give somebody one piece of advice as far as just that, like, and learning these skills and doing everything, like, slowing down is the way to do it. Like when you're in these situations, I think, And I think, as a kid, maybe I thought more of like, oh, I got to be quick and, squirrely on my feet. Really, you don't. Like when something's going down, when something's happening, take a deep breath and be like, okay, what's going on? Like, I broke my leg. I've never been in this situation, but, it's like you're not just going to be like, what do I do? What do I do? You're like, okay, that happened. All right, like, that's not going to hurt me. That's not going to hurt me. Okay, well, it's getting dark, So even as a kid, running around in the woods, like, that's something you don't do. You don't slow down so much because you're a kid and you're running around like a nut and you just don't know what's going on.
You're going to always be more effective at dealing with a tough situation if you slow down and you have patience. And I learned that a lot doing I've done a wilderness first responder course, and just learning how, like, when you approach a situation where someone is injured, first thing you think about is yourself. Like, you slow down. You're not just running in like, oh my God, what am I going to do to save this person? You're like, what hurt them? Is it going to hurt me? Like, just even that, like, take a breath before you walk in. 5 seconds is not going to make the difference between life and death most of the time. So just taking that time and learning how to do that, I think, is such a valuable skill. And I think that you can probably relate to that with a lot of the work that you do. It's like, doesn't help to rush anything or to get stressed and, like, feel like you have to move fast. You got to slow down. You got to think about all the details. You got to really, like, allow it to fall into place.
And be intentional. I think being intentional about, especially, again, in situations where you might be tired or something like that, or just there's a lot going on, being really intentional about each of the things that you're addressing is a really good way to, like, stay focused and also, make sure that you're not in a challenging spot when you don't have to be or get hurt.
Intention and focus, I think, are the two key words here. Like, especially with an emergency situation, like, people often hyperventilate, which, as you know, causes all sorts of physiological imbalances. I mean, it increases your oxygen rate, but it can mess with your mind and cause you to lose sense of what's logical. And it almost pushes the logic to the back burner because the amygdala in your brain took over. And logic goes out the window, and then it's just like you start messing up. You start forgetting core things that you're supposed to know, and that's why people black out when they get.
And you're more likely to make another mistake that's going to injure you or make the problem worse.
So, like, approaching these freak out situations in a logical way, right? Like, if you strip all the emotion away, regardless of the pain that makes people cry or what you're hearing, and you just go, okay, how do I get from point A to point B in the safest possible manner? And then the awareness, okay, this is my situation. These are the possible risks. All right, let's do this. Rather than just going, oh, that's hurt. Oh, I'm just going to go run for it.
Yeah, and also for the people listening, like that, what Sean just said about, sort of being able to take the emotion out of it as much as you can, that's another thing that just takes a ton of practice. Like, whether it's not even just in a survival situation, like, if you can get good at that in your life, then it's going to apply to all these different things. And so, expecting yourself to handle a really challenging situation calmly is not a reasonable expectation for most people. It's not something that you're going to necessarily be comfortable with. Some people have the ability to do it, without a whole lot of practice, and that's awesome. But most people don't. And I think that's a good thing to recognize, too, is, like, if you're one of those people, which you probably are, you either have to practice it a lot or really just, like, spend some time figuring out how to do it. I mean, it's just not natural. It's not natural. Be intentional about how you do it. And because, when you're freaked out and you got that fight or flight mode going on in your brain, it's very hard to slow that down. It's very hard to think logically, and you kind of have to be in a couple situations sometimes like that before you get really good at it, or do some meditation practice like that I like to do, where you're really working on controlling your heart rate and your breathing.
Hence the word preparation, all going back to preparation. Same thing, as you said, with what I do. Generally speaking, the more prepared a person is before they go on stage, the less freaked out they are.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because I'm not going to lie, every time before I go out on stage, and any performer that says that this is true, they're lying. There's always some kind of butterflies. Always.
I disagree, so maybe I'm lying about it. Yeah.
Really? Well, I think
I agree with you.
I think I haven't met a single person who said, if it's not, so maybe butterflies might not be the right word, but energy and adrenaline that if not, if you don't know how to manage that energy or adrenaline, it turns into butterflies. Whereas if you manage it right, it can turn into creative focus.
Maybe I'm just good at managing it.
It could be as simple as that. I mean, I don't really have issues with that as much anymore, but I still feel something coming on. And I think a lot of y'all can relate, unless you're Kiah, and he's just like invincible, and he can just do this every day.
Yeah.
Calmly and collectively, no problem. All right, so what's let's switch and talk about something, an adventure situation, an adventure survival type situation that you have recently been on. Now I know, right? You all both just recently went on a adventure.
Yes, we've been on an adventure recently together. Yeah, I mean, I think maybe I'll let Kiah talk about that a little bit. But I think for me, the most recent big adventure that I've been on was I got the opportunity, it was not quite 2 years ago, so not that recently, but, you know, still pretty fresh in my experience, to go on the show Naked and Afraid, the Discovery Channel show. And that was just, yeah, an incredible experience.
It's the real deal. They don't play around.
Amazing. Yeah, it's very, very, very real. Yeah.
It's not like Survivor, right? Survivor's like child's play compared to that.
Yeah, I don't really know much about Survivor, to be honest, so I can't really speak to it very much, but one of my producers on Naked and Afraid had previously worked on Survivor, so she did tell me a little bit about it. But yeah, that was a pretty incredible experience. I got to go to Ecuador and spend 3 weeks in the coastal jungle being filmed by a crew of people who were there to watch me struggle and suffer while they were not necessarily struggling or suffering all that much. So that was definitely a really interesting experience, and I was able to make it through the 3 weeks. The goal is to complete 21 days. You get dropped off on day 1 with nothing except for one item that you get to choose to bring. So I chose a pot to boil water in and be able to have safe water. I was thinking, you know, I can survive 21 days without food in theory, but I cannot survive more than a couple of days without water, you know. And if I get sick from water, then you're done. And so I ended up getting paired up with 2 other people. Usually it's just one person that you don't know, but this time they had paired me with 2. So I was paired with really great folks, Brittany and Tanner, and we had a lot of fun out there. And I won't give too many spoilers for those who haven't seen it yet, but it was a really good experience, and it pushed me so far out past what I had ever really experienced before that it gave me a lot. You know, it gave me a lot of lessons and gave me a lot of confidence and skills, and now I can go backpacking and forget a couple of key items and be like, at least I've got clothes on, you know. It doesn't take that much to just remind me that what I truly need to survive and exist is not actually as much as I tell myself most of the time, you know. So that for me was a big adventure experience I had recently that stands out, I think, and it will probably stand out as such for the rest of my life. It was just one of those things that is just once in a lifetime in a lot of ways, and truly exceeded my expectations. So
it was pretty epic, guys. I saw the full episode. For those of you who haven't seen it, there'll be a link to this in the show notes. There were a few clips that were cut in that you already saw just a little bit, just to give you a little teaser of this. But man, like for real, this is the real deal. How many pounds did you lose?
I lost 20 pounds in 21 days.
20 pounds in 21 days. So maybe, hey, forget Atkins, forget the keto diet, go on Naked and Afraid. You will guaranteed lose the weight.
You will lose weight, yeah. You might have some other problems come up, though. So,
like major problems.
Weigh your pros and cons first there.
Depends how high priority your weight loss is, but I'm just saying it's another option for you if the keto or Atkins doesn't work. What about Kiah?
I've not been on Naked and Afraid. I've not been on Naked and Afraid, but
it's okay.
A recent adventure experience that I had was, so Aosha and I have a goal to climb the highest peak in every state in the United States, except for Alaska because it's too cold.
Neither of us want to lose our feet.
Barefoot. So climbing all of the highest peaks barefoot. And so we've done a few here and there, and we've our first one we did was Mount Washington, New Hampshire, years and years ago. We were teenagers, and that was cool. But this past summer, I was in Colorado, and I ended up climbing Mount Elbert, which was not too hard. It wasn't honestly that challenging. It was, it was maybe 5 miles up and 5 miles back or something like that. And then this year, Aosha and some friends got a permit to climb Mount Whitney, which is the highest peak in California and the highest peak in the lower 48. Is that correct?
Yeah, it is. It's the highest peak in the lower 48.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so 14,508. It was 505
Yep.
or 508. It's changing
It's been slowly growing.
because mountains grow, which is crazy.
Some of them do.
Some of them do. This mountain is still growing. Some of them are actually shrinking.
And I think that it also has to do with the advancements in
Technology.
technology to measure the height of things
Yeah.
too.
So
I don't know which one of it. I know that Whitney is growing a little bit over time, but
So we set out to do that, and we started at maybe 1:30 in the morning, and we started hiking, and we got up maybe about 5 miles or so, or 6 miles almost before sun rose, and then all barefoot, all feeling good, no injuries yet, and we ended up completing the climb. And I think we summited it in about 9 hours. It's a little slow when you're barefoot because you have to be cautious, intentional, slow things down a little bit, because if you stub your toe with the boot on, Sean, then you're fine. But if you stub your toe without shoes on, it could be fine, but it also could end your
probably
hike.
not fine.
You need to patch it up. I did it on Elbert. I had to put duct tape and stuff on my foot. Anyways.
Gorilla tape, I think it was, right?
It was, actually. Yeah, it was. Thank you for the advertisement.
Please sponsor
Yeah,
the Making
sponsor.
Magic podcast, 3M.
Yeah, there we go. So yeah, it was 11 miles uphill the entire way. Almost 8,000 feet of elevation gain.
Almost 7,000 feet.
Almost 7,000 feet of elevation gain. Yep, exactly.
But we'll say 8 just to give you a little extra
Yeah.
credit.
It was actually closer to 18, but we just like to round down.
Round down, yeah. That's right. So we completed that in about 9 hours, and then we're able to do it safely and then descend. We put shoes on to descend because that's not part of our goal, and it's also really dangerous to go down something steep and slippery without shoes because you're going to get hurt, and we don't really want to get hurt. Going up is actually quite a bit easier than going down. But we ended up completing the whole thing in I think 16 hours or something like that, after including some rest time and all that, and it was incredible. People at the summit did not believe that we had done it. We were up there barefoot, and they said, "Oh, did you go up barefoot all the way? That's funny." And we were like, "Yeah." And they're like, "No." We were like, "Yeah." And they're like, "Oh, wait, you did?" And we were like, "Yeah, we did." And they're like, "Oh my goodness!" Like, people don't really fathom that, but it is safe, I would say, for us. Don't do that. Don't go climb a barefoot peak. It's not, you need almost a lifetime of preparation, and I would say, just to have the right awareness to really do it safely, and almost a lifetime of time in the mountains, because you don't want to be thinking too much about that stuff, as well as thinking about not hurting your feet. So that was a really amazing adventure, and we're slowly chipping away at this goal of ours. We have a lot of work to do, and we're going to start being more intentional about it in the next few years, of maybe trying to do a couple a year if we can, and just start
There's
working
still
at
some
it.
really hard ones out there. Yeah, Whitney's the highest in the lower 48. It's not the hardest. It's definitely not the hardest.
Don't tell them that, though.
Yeah,
We'll have to update you when we hit a couple of the harder ones, and yeah, maybe we'll take some video and send it your way. You can
That would be great.
paste it in somewhere for a little update for folks.
That would
'cause
be fantastic.
we enjoy documenting our adventures for sure and sharing them. So
And I've seen these pictures, folks. There will be, if you hadn't seen them already, other photos that were spliced in here. But I also just want to point out, make very clear to the listeners and viewers, these two have been walking barefoot and obsessing over this barefoot thing ever since you were children, right?
yeah, pretty much, yeah.
And it's been like a daily thing for the majority of the day. You're not wearing shoes. Is that right?
Yeah, unless we're in the city walking around in public spaces, just because it's unsanitary.
Yeah.
I'm not interested in stepping in bathrooms with bare feet.
Well,
but
yeah, that's pretty.
when it comes to being outside and
Yeah.
being in nature and just being around the house, then absolutely.
So just like when you're playing the guitar, for instance, I think we talked about this, building up calluses on your fingers. Same thing with your feet. You gotta get out there, do it for a very long time. So you can work up to it, but don't just throw off your shoes and expect to climb a mountain.
Start by walking to your mailbox and back in the morning when you're getting your mail. That's a really good starting point because the gravel is intense, but you can go slow. and
Gravel
you can take
honestly
your time.
really sucks. It's
Yeah.
like not good.
So
for
start
the feet.
with that and then see how it feels. Most likely you'll be deterred and decide not to do it.
But we encourage you to continue.
We do.
So with their full permission, try it out. Go to your mailbox. Have fun with that. See how long you can last. And then after the first couple trips to the mailbox, you'll be able to decide whether going barefoot on these adventures is really your thing or not.
Yeah, and hiking around in the forest is always nice too because there's not usually jagged, sharp rocks.
Just
so.
go slowly.
Yep.
And watch your feet.
Expect the unexpected and watch out for snakes, right?
Yep. Yeah, that's definitely something to consider.
No big deal. No big deal. All right. What about so we've talked about some of your past experiences, some of your current experiences, and we could probably have an 8-hour conversation about all of your experiences. I mean, because you're constantly going way out of your comfort zone for this. But when you're going out of your comfort zone, Kiah and Aosha, what are some of the skills? I'll let each of you take a shot at this. Would you say that you're comfortable at and best at? And we're talking about creative survival skills.
Yeah. That's a good question, Sean. And it's also a good question for the two of us because we've done a lot of survival stuff together. And so in a situation as a community, if there are 3 or 4 of you, you sort of divide up tasks. You figure out who's good at what. A lot of the time, in that situation with other people, I would build a shelter. I would work on the shelter. I would work on gathering the wood and, making the structure, then gathering the leaves, whatever kind of structure we were building, because that takes a lot of time. And Aosha might go start the fire. He was always really strong with fire, and he'll tell you more about it too. But so it was always divided between us, and then somebody else we were with might, okay, now they're going to go look for water. So shelter, water, fire, food is the order of survival. These are the 4 things. Within everything else, you need these things to survive. And so really, I would say the water, the food, and the shelter part I've always been really, really comfortable with. And once you have the water source found, once you have the shelter built, everything else is and the fire going, everything else is pretty much keep those things maintained and improving, and then work on finding food. And food is just, hunting. Aosha maybe was usually one hunting. I was usually the one gathering plants. We just sort of one of us would focus on things more, and so we would have a little bit more of an edge there, and then you're able to bring more to the community versus me going and trying to do something that's less in my comfort zone. That being said, I really feel confident in everything if I was alone or if I was with other people that weren't as strong in those things. I'm sure that I could come through. But yeah, I think just again, relating to my exact experience in survival situations, again, that I've put myself in, I feel like my task is usually something along the lines of, getting the shelter built, because I was always really confident in that.
Okay.
And obviously there's adaptability along with all of this stuff, but direct skills, I would say shelter. Yeah.
Shelter, helter skelter, get your shelter together because you got the elements coming at you.
Yeah, it's the most important thing. I mean, it's shelter, water, fire, food. That's also the order. Shelter, get your shelter built. Figure out if you're safe. Water, can't survive long without water. Fire, keeps animals away, keeps you warm. And then food, again, like he was mentioning about the naked and afraid stuff, he was like, I could go 21 days without food, my body would not die. But, then after you've got all that, 85, 90% of your time is spent looking for food because everything else is already taken care of.
Yeah.
Got it. We'll let Aosha take a stab at that.
Yeah, I think sort of some of the stuff he said.
Give a little more slack on your cable, probably. There you go.
There we go.
There. Cool.
This is not one of my strong suits.
That's okay. That's okay. We're in the wild. We're doing it. We're
yeah,
surviving.
I think one thing I've always been really confident with is getting fires started. It's something that I've practiced a lot, and using a bow drill, which is a way to make friction fire, or just using matches, a lighter, whatever I have. It's definitely a big skill, even when you have a lighter. If it's pouring rain or something, just having the ability to know how to bring that all together and do it effectively. So that's definitely always been something I've really enjoyed, and so has always been a big strong suit of mine. And then the food thing, obviously foraging and stuff is something I've done a lot of. I'm not that skilled at it in other places. I definitely am in North Carolina because I know a lot of the stuff and I lived here for a long time. But when you put me in a new place, definitely pushes my limits. And then I think that for me, the other survival skill that I have that maybe isn't quite as hard skill oriented, but is just like mental fortitude. And that may not be quite as along the lines of what you're, asking, but to me it feels like the biggest part. If you have the basic physical skills, and the more you practice and the more comfortable you are, the better. But you have to have the right mental attitude, and you have to be able to fail a bunch and be okay with that. Don't get angry and, throw stuff around and get super worked up and spend a bunch of energy. Don't, be kind to yourself. Don't be too hard on yourself. And I think that that's a really big part of being successful in those situations, is just having a good mental attitude. Like being patient with yourself and being confident that, this and this and this didn't work, but I'm still going to keep trying, what am I going to do? Just sit down and quit? No. You got to just keep moving forward, even if things get really challenging. And I think that, I don't know if it's necessarily an underrated part of that, but it's not something that people think about when they think of primitive survival. They mostly think about the hard skills that you need to be able to do, the little creative things. And
That's how I was approaching it, but that's a really great point.
so, yeah, I think for me, especially in that 3-week experience, it was like the mental part of it was what kept me going. The fact that I was prepared mentally. And I think that that's something that's really important, because there's people out there who get in these situations that don't have skills, that are in true survival situations, that get lost or whatever happens. And it's shocking what they can do. And it almost always boils down in the stories they tell and everything to their mental fortitude. And I think that that's just such a key to being effective in those situations.
So everybody just take a step back for a moment when you consider your own skill set, right? Like whether you are, like I said, a graphic designer, whether you're a drummer, whether you're an internet marketer, right? Like it does all come down to your mindset, because with whatever you're approaching in life, whatever your trade is or your business, you're always going to run into challenges. That's a part of life. And if you don't have your mindset right, it doesn't matter how good you are at making a fire. It doesn't matter how good you are at making impromptu tools. And it doesn't matter how well you know how to use the computer. Because if your computer seizes up, for instance, and then you don't have the mental fortitude to look at things logically, systematically, go through these troubleshooting, like you troubleshoot stuff outside, you're gonna be so lost, and then you're gonna, once again, the amygdala kicks in, fight or flight. You're gonna skip over everything, and then after it's over, like the next day, you're gonna go, really? Did I really just miss that? I feel like a dope for doing that. I can't believe I overlooked that. It was sitting right there, or something. So mental fortitude, very good point.
Yeah, and I like how you relate that to other things, because it's so true for every aspect of life. That's one thing I like about these more tangible survival experiences, is a lot of those little lessons translate to everything. And that's just a really cool thing to connect to the rest of my life and to be able to share with other people about their lives.
It takes you back to your primal instinct. As a human, we all have primal instincts, and all of this other stuff that we grow up with as a child is just extra. But when it comes down to it, we're all just primal beings, and we're very basic. We have basic needs, and all these other luxuries is just something that we're accepted like automatically, just because we're a part of society, and we just go, oh yeah, this is what we come to expect.
Most people are far overstimulated with a lot of different things that we don't really need.
Which is why you hear about things like a dopamine fast. Have you ever heard of that?
I have, yes.
dopamine fasting is basically stripping away all the overstimulation for a while and the things that we get attached to. And so we can return to that primal state. And when you're out in the woods or wherever, the jungle, wherever, it takes you back to that state. And it's important to be able to tap into that, or else you're just done.
Absolutely.
You're lost.
I think the power of nature's ability to revert us or pull us back to that more basic state of existence, more primal state of existence, is incredibly powerful. Like, nature does that. That's a tool that you can use in your life. Like, leave your phone in the house, go for a walk in nature, and just like sit down and look at the trees for a while. Take some deep breaths, and it will bring you so much closer to that than you are sitting in your house trying to do the same thing. I mean, that's at least been my experience, and I think that a lot of people reflect that as well. There's a lot of science these days on how nature is incredibly good for your like physiological health, just existing, like walking in nature, being in nature, and disconnecting from technology and all of these stressors and this external stimulation. And I think that's just reminds me how important it is to continue to do these things. And it feels like it's just so good for my mental being to like put myself outside, even if it's not on a major adventure. Even just like this, we're sitting here like under the trees listening to the blue jays and the crickets, and like it's nice. Like, it's super chill.
It is nice.
It's very nice.
This is probably the most relaxed I've been in all of my interviews, just because I'm where my body's supposed to be.
Yeah, it's a really beautiful thing.
Nature is a beautiful thing. So with that being said, we've taken a look back in time at Kiah and Aosha's challenges and adventures. Now I'd like to just ask this, because we all come from somewhere and we all stand on the shoulders of giants, right? Like in my craft, people say, oh, that's amazing what you did there, Sean, in your show, but like I actually talk about this in my show, that I do stand on the shoulders of giants. There's people that came before me, and you look at what they've done, you learn from them, you become inspired, whether it be through a mentor, which I highly recommend, by the way, that people find a mentor if you haven't, in whatever field you're pursuing. You had mentioned, I think, something about mentors. So is there anybody that you would like to recognize or share with us that did kind of give you any mentorship or advice that you looked up to?
Yeah, I would say there are quite a few people in my life, especially in this field of survival and on a broader picture, sort of connection with nature, as we're just sort of talking about. Aosha was just talking about. I started doing outdoor camps when I was pretty young, and I think really just I don't these days especially, but just even then, like, I looked up some to people I read about in books and things like that, but it was mostly like the people that were in my life that were sharing these skills with me. A mentor of mine, Gumby, who was a really awesome person in my life for a long time and still is, was one of my teachers and one of my mentors, learning these skills and also just being a camp counselor for me, but also sort of led by example of like, here's how you learn things, you just do them. He wasn't out there necessarily trying to show us how to do everything. There's this concept that has been presented in different teachings called coyote teaching, and it's really based on giving somebody the pieces of a puzzle and letting them figure it out, because that's how you actually learn to do something. You don't learn by somebody telling you. And so he did that kind of thing a lot with me and Aosha, and everybody else that he was teaching. And then with these survival overnights that we started doing, where we would work with a shelter, water, fire, food order, and we would, long story short, sort of wean ourselves off of these things as we added time. So we'd be like, okay, 2 nights without these things, 3 nights with only one thing, and then the final challenge was a 4-nighter. We were like 15 or something the first time we went through that, and he wasn't our teacher. He wasn't in charge. We were just there together doing it. And as a young teenager, really, being in that situation with someone who was just they weren't like teaching us the skills. We were all learning them together, and they were leading by example, being like, let's just do it. Let's just practice these things. Like, oh, you can't figure this out, let me try. And be in that sort of experience together was really a very affirming and like awesome thing for me, as a young adult to go through those experiences. So that was a huge, Gumby was a huge part of that, and I still look up to him in that way because he still lives that way. He's still living the same life he was living a long time ago, really, even more embracing, his roots of primal, living and living in a really simple and low impact way in the world. And then continuing to lifelong learning, continuing to learn skills and practice skills and do new things and learn new things. I mean, it's such an admirable thing to me. And I mean, I could list 100 people probably, but Sarah Haggerty was another person who is in my life who has done that for me as well. Was one of my mentors growing up, similar time period of my life. And, she taught me a lot of the skills too, was teaching in the same way, those coyote teaching of giving you the pieces of the puzzle and letting you figure it out. But also she was, more focused too on the connection with nature. And sort of the general spirituality of being out in the woods and being connected to things and slowing down and recognizing what you were doing and being intentional about what you were doing. And the fact that, being outdoors is an ancient thing and we can all benefit from that in some way or another through survival skills and just literally connecting with nature and bringing other people into nature and helping them connect with nature because it's an incredibly healing thing. So I think she was one of the people in my life too who helped really bring that to light for me, is just how important that is, and then sharing that experience with other people because it's so important to me now in life and always has been, and she was really a huge part of that realization and supporting me in that process of realizing that. Yeah.
Okay. Aosha?
Yeah, I honestly don't have a whole lot to add. I mean, those to me just growing up were the two people that really gave.
Because you trained together
Yeah.
with those people. Okay.
Up until we're
twins. We do
16
everything
or
together.
17,
Got it. I should have known that.
We didn't spend more than 8 seconds apart. I mean, it's so we did a lot of that together, and I would echo the same. Where those two mentors were definitely the biggest influence for us in that way, and in our confidence in being out in nature and learning those skills. And
yeah.
And I haven't been in as close touch with Gumby these days, but Sarah lives out in Colorado, and I recently stayed with her for a few days, and we just have this continuing connection and continue to learn things from each other, and it's just a very powerful mentorship experience to be connected to those people that I've known for, 10 years now, over 10 years.
So find a mentor, folks. Find somebody that's been there that can share with you those shortcuts. It really helps. And not only do they share those shortcuts and shave years off your learning curve, but they inspire you to be like them and do great things in whatever field that you're pursuing. That's great. That's great that you had the mentorship. Now I'm going to switch a gear again because it's all about getting your creative gears turning with this show. And I'm going to have you guys share this is usually my favorite question and everybody's favorite question to listen to. What is, in your experience with what you guys do, the biggest epic fail that ever happened when you were out in the wild, in the middle of nowhere, and something just blew up in your face and the crazier the story, the funnier the story, the better. So I'll let either of you jump in there.
Ooh, I don't know. You got something in
The
mind?
more dangerous
I might
the
have
story,
to chew
too.
on that for a minute.
Sure.
Sorry.
I just took care of that mosquito on his forehead.
Yeah, thank you for that.
You're welcome.
You can chew on the question for a second. It's such a loaded question.
Yeah.
Because failure to me is such a weird concept. But I that being said, I understand the question, so I can definitely answer it. I think I think it's funny. I mentioned that shelter was sort of a strong suit for me, and I think there have been quite a few situations where we've been somewhere, in this local area, North Carolina or something, and it's December or it's November and it's cold, and you might think, oh, it's fine. I'll be okay. It'll be all right. I don't need to worry about building a great shelter. It's fine. And I've slept on the ground, shivering all night in 30-degree weather, so many times. And not because I didn't have the ability to maybe make a good shelter, or at least a decent shelter. And I mean, at some point it was not knowing exactly how to do it, and now I know. But just being like, oh, I'll be fine. I guess another, so being ill-prepared, and thinking, oh, it'll be fine, whatever. I guess another one was like a summertime trip where we were like, oh, we don't need to build a shelter. It's not going to rain. We did have raincoats, we were somewhat prepared.
It was terrible if I can remember what you're
It was awful.
about.
And it was we were near the Eno River, and it was just like, yeah, we're like, we'll be fine. We won't build a shelter. It'll be all right. Rained all night. And so we had raincoats, but that was not much. And
I was using a rock as a pillow.
Yeah, it was
A
bad.
rock.
And
Ooh.
the mosquitoes were so bad. I remember that next day, after not sleeping a wink because, it was rainy and the mosquitoes were just going crazy on us.
It was hot, too.
And it was really hot. It was like
hot and
sweating.
rainy.
I think I had, 50 to 60 bites easily on each foot, ankle, hands, because there was just no way around it. And here we are thinking, oh, it's not going to rain. And the rain kind of triggered the mosquitoes, too.
We also didn't bring shoes.
We also didn't bring shoes. Why didn't we bring shoes? That's so
I
unwise.
don't know.
Yeah, so always bring shoes. Even if you're going barefoot, always bring shoes. Brings up another point, just to say that really quick. I'm doing all this barefoot hiking stuff. I always have shoes in my bag. Always. Always.
Thank you for the disclaimer.
Not that time, though.
Oh, okay.
Apparently, because, we were stupid. So that was a pretty big fail, because you're just like, oh, we could have built a shelter and basically been fine.
Yeah.
But we didn't, and we were, like, up all night in a miserable condition. But you learn. I've never done that again, I don't think, after that. I mean, maybe. So always
hard to recreate.
There's a reason the
Yeah.
shelter's the first one in the shelter, water, fire, food. Just it doesn't matter if the weather looks great. Build a shelter.
Right.
Yep, I remember that well. It was a rough night. It was a really rough night. So.
Don't assume anything, folks, and try to use other things than a rock for a pillow, if you can.
Nature doesn't really care what you think about the situation, so.
That's true. Nature doesn't. And also, life usually doesn't care what it throws at you, and it's up to us, like you and I, to respond to that or prepare for that properly.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah, so one comes to mind as far as my biggest sort of fail, I would say. And like Kiah said, that term is interesting because people perceive it differently. A lot of people think when they failed that it's this huge letdown and they've like made a huge mistake. But when I fail, it's like, sweet, I'll do it better next time. I've learned something from it, And one thing that I've, been teaching kids and stuff, if they make a mistake, like had a kid cut himself pretty badly, and I'm like holding his hand up above his heart, with a bandana wrapped around it, going to get the first aid kit, and he's all worried about it. And I said, did you learn something? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, then you're going to be fine. It's not a big deal. You learned something. You won't make that mistake again. So for me, a failure is more like things just go so far from your expectation, whether or not you complete your goal, right? And it usually involves suffering. So I was this was last year, I think it was last year, and I was in New Mexico with my girlfriend, Chrissy. We went to New Mexico and met up with some of her family members, and we were going to go up Sandia Peak, which is right outside of Albuquerque, and we were going to do the little like tram thing that goes up, like a ski lift basically, that goes up from the non-ski side of the mountain. It's just kind of from town. You can go up to the top, and it's really beautiful, and everyone does it, and there's a little restaurant up there and a ski slope on the backside. And so it was the day before, it might have been the day before, and we were talking about it, and I was like, well, I don't really want to ride the thing up. Like, I want to hike up. And I think it was, I can't remember what time of year it was, but it was cold, and there was some snow on the ground. Not in town necessarily, but up there was, and Chrissy was kind of like, I don't think that's a good idea. I think that we should just go up, like, we got into more depth than that, but the gist of it was like she didn't have a good feeling about it. But I was like, I'm going to do it. I really want to do this. And that night, it snowed. We got like a tiny dusting of snow in town, and I'm like, not too bad. I'd been to REI the previous day and asked one of the employees like about the trail, and he was like, yeah, bring micro spikes, which I had, and just in case it's icy near the top, and like you'll be fine. And so I looked at the map, and I'm doing my thing, and I'm thinking, okay, this is going to be like about 4 hours or so. Be about 4 hour trip, not too much elevation gain, like 5,000 feet of elevation gain. So I guess it was, a decent hike, but nothing that I didn't expect to do well. And so I start hiking. Chrissy dropped me off at the trailhead at like 7 a.m. or something. They're going to give me 3.5 hours, and then they're going to go ride the thing up and meet me at the top. So we got it all planned out. I start hiking, and I'm going up and up and up, and the snow's getting a little bit deeper and a little bit deeper. And eventually all the tracks stopped where people had been hiking. So like everyone else was kind of like, we're good. And I'm like, oh, you know what? I'm feeling great. We're going to just keep doing this. And so, I start hiking through the snow, knee deep. And then it gets to like waist deep in some places, and this is like fresh powder, so like you're not walking on top of it, you're just like plowing through it,
sinking in.
Yeah. And at a certain point I started to feel my groin muscle in here like feeling a little funny, because I'm lifting my legs up, really like pulling up really hard out of the snow, both of my legs.
The thigh going like up into the hip.
Yeah, like lifting it like above my hip and all the way around, trying to get through this snow. And didn't think much of it at first, but I kept going. I was just like, I'm going to keep doing this. And I was a little over halfway, and I thought I was almost there, because the map was, I was having a hard time. The GPS was a little weird, and distance is hard to judge sometimes. And so I was like, I'm almost there. Like, I'm just going to keep going. My groin's really starting to hurt at this point. Like, every step is kind of challenging. I ended up getting lost in the woods when I got near like the mid-upper section of the mountain, because the trail was obviously not pronounced at all, because there's like 3.5 feet of snow on the ground. And I kept going and following the little line on my GPS. I had a GPS with me that is called a Garmin InReach, and you can send out text messages and stuff even when you don't have service. It's a satellite thing. So, I had a means of reaching out. I was talking to Chrissy from time to time, being like, yeah, I'm doing pretty good. Like, I'll be up there in a bit. And at a certain point, I kind of realized that I was in trouble, because I was in a lot of pain, and it was getting later than I thought it was going to be. I'd been on the trail for 6 hours or something like that at that point. And I just was like, thinking I should turn around, but I was like, I'm over halfway. Like, it wouldn't make sense to go back down at this point, which probably would have been the good call in hindsight.
Yeah.
To just follow my trail back down and just be going downhill. So I kept going, and it ended up taking me 9 hours to get to the top. And by the time I got right near the top, I had this stick that I was using as like a walking stick, and I was grabbing with my right hand. I was grabbing my pants and lifting my leg, because it was in so much pain from pulling that muscle really badly. And so I eventually made it up to the top. 9 hours later, in total misery. I was covered in ice. My mustache was iced over. My shoelaces had little like ice balls all over them. And I get to the door of the restaurant on top, where Chrissy's evidently waiting for me with a burger and a beer that she'd ordered like 3 hours ago.
I was going to say 9 hours ago.
Yeah. And
cold by now.
And the woman who was working there came to the door, and she was like, hey, well, like, what can I do for you? And I was like, oh, my partner is in there like waiting for me. And she kind of looks over her shoulder. And I look bad. I mean, like, bloodshot eyes, like my face is all red. I'm like wet, like covered in ice. And she's kind of like, no, I don't think there's anybody waiting for you. And I was like, no, there definitely is.
There better be.
So the woman goes back inside and literally had to go get Chrissy, and for her to come to the door and be like, yeah, like, he's with me. Because she was like, this dude is like, I'm not going to let him in here unless he really, like, actually has someone waiting, because he looks kind of like, and I was like kind of borderline, like,
delirious.
I was out of it.
Yeah.
I was out of it.
Gosh.
And so I walk in there and sit down to this cold burger, cold fries, and a flat beer. But it was like the best beer I've ever had in my entire life. And that's what we call type 3 fun. Type 1 fun, it's fun when you're doing it, and it's fun afterwards. Type 2 fun kind of sucks when you're in the middle of it, but it's a great story, and it's like you still think, like, that was actually pretty cool. Type 3 fun is just like, that was really, really shitty. And it's still really, really shitty to think about it. So that was one of the biggest, like, bad judgment calls where, like, I almost got in a really bad situation, but did make it through. So there you go.
Wow. I wasn't expecting that, but I mean, I knew it was going to be pretty epic. Asking you guys those kind of questions. It sounds like something out of a Quentin Tarantino movie, like that the superhero or the villain has to go through, or like some. I thought you were going to say she left after after all that.
Yeah, she was like not gonna leave, but was definitely like, yeah, I've been here for a while.
Or I thought you were going to say she was asleep.
Nope, not quite. She was definitely waiting at the edge of her seat for me to get up there, and yeah, it was not particularly good experience, even in hindsight. So
Wow. So, folks, these are the kind of things that can happen at any time, even if you are prepared. So, I would say, to recap, expect the unexpected, be well prepared, whether it be in knowledge or physically doing is much better, like the coyote method of giving you the pieces to the puzzle, and then encouraging the person to figure that out. And then another great takeaway from this is to make sure you're in the right headspace. Your headspace is really important, because if you're not in the right headspace, none of the other tools, physical tools, matter.
yeah,
And I would say probably another great takeaway from like what Kiah was saying was be comfortable with purposefully going out of your way to challenge yourself as part of that preparation, not waiting for the opportunity, but saying, I've made this decision to go do this today because I am going to get out of my comfort zone, and now I'm going to be more prepared because of that.
yeah. Being intentional. That's a really, really good term for that. Like, you need to be intentional about your preparation and about the things that you do to, bring yourself to where you want to be with your skills.
Slowing down, cutting through the noise, cutting through the BS, that emotional ride that automatically kicks in to get from point A to point B. Wow. This has been quite the discussion, and I would love for this to go longer, but I don't think your average person, I don't know how long. It depends. If they're going cross-country, we could do a cross-country version. That could be an 8-hour conversation.
We'll do that sometime. We'll advertise it for folks that are driving cross-country and just say, all right, we're going to really get into it here.
That could be the cross-country version. Or I would love to join you guys on one of your adventures and do a report of the trip all the way.
We'll be carrying you by the end, but we'll do it.
And I'll be wearing shoes.
No, that would be really cool. That would be a lot of fun. We definitely would love to do that with you.
Sounds great, Sean.
We'll interview you about it afterwards.
Yeah, I don't know if I'll be alive to be able to be interviewed. I might lose 20-some pounds. I can't afford to lose any more weight. I lose weight without trying. That's my problem. But dang, man, this has been an amazing chat. Thank you for...
Thanks for having us, Sean. It's been really fun.
This has been really cool. It's been really cool to see your podcast and now to sit down and get to do it with you. I think for me, it's the first time I've ever done any podcast recording, so it's kind of cool to sit down and do it in such a familiar space and familiar face, and yeah, it's been really cool.
Welcome to the club. So here we are, and before I let you guys go, before I wrap this up, where can our viewers and listeners learn more about you guys, the creative survivalists?
Yeah, the only place you can really find me anywhere in the world is Instagram. That's where I'm most active. Kiah Wells Music. Sean can put a link in there for you,
There's
I'm
a
sure.
link in the description, and it was just there displayed below for you guys watching.
And I'm a musician, so that's how you can keep track of me if you want to know where I'm playing shows or anything like that. I usually post on there, and I post some videos of me playing, and if you want to know what I'm up to, that's the best way to keep track of me. For sure, yeah.
He likes to both of them like to live off the grid. So at Kiah Wells Music, he's a great musician, plays guitar and mandolin.
Everything.
Oh, okay. Well, you can follow him on Instagram.
You can figure it out on the Instagram page.
Piano, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Multi-talented. Everything. And what about Aosha? Where can they find more about you?
Sort of the same deal. I'm mostly active on Instagram as far as just keeping people updated. And that's Barefoot Adventures. Barefoot as in like the animal, BEAR. And then it's barefoot_adventures.
I'm sure you see that one down below too.
You have just seen it
There
for
it
those of
is.
you watching, but for those of you listening, BEAR foot_adventures. All the links will be in the show notes. and you could keep up with their amazing adventures. They post some crazy pictures of like mountain summits that I've seen. You guys have one for Mount Whitney up there.
Yeah, we've got some pictures up there, and you know, whenever I'm traveling cross country and doing stuff, I'm always pretty active on my story, so people can get a little bit more of a live update of what I'm up to. And I also enjoy taking people out and teaching, you know, so you know, that's another thing that people can connect with me over, is if you're interested in learning some skills or just want to talk a little bit about some adventure you're going to get into, and you want some advice. You know, I've been to a lot of different places and would be really happy to chat about it and just give people information and have a good conversation. So
hit him up. Yeah, he's like a creative consultant for survival.
Yep, and if you want to go on a hike together and learn some stuff, I'll do that too. I always enjoy getting out there and encouraging people to experience nature. So
awesome. Well, I think you guys hopefully have learned a lot. I hope you were listening to everything that they were saying, because there was a lot of lessons. Even if you're just afraid of the dirt and afraid of the ickiness of being out in the dirt and getting wet and wild and all this, all of these lessons can be applied to your life, no matter what kind of profession or career you're into. This is just such great information. So I hope you guys got some value out of this. And you know me, with the acorns in the background, though, this time, and the birds chirping and the crickets, you all have been watching and listening to another episode of the Making Magic podcast. If you're listening to the sound of our voices on popular apps like Apple and Spotify, feel free to rate the show, drop a review. We always love hearing your feedback, and you can play this in your car, etc., etc. If you're watching this on YouTube, smash that like, comment, subscribe. You know what to do. That way this information can reach as many people and benefit as many people as possible. Because I'm all about taking you out of your comfort zone and getting your creative gears turning, and I think we did just that. So we'll see you guys next time in the next episode. Thanks so much. Thanks, guys.
Thanks
for
Sean.
having us, Sean.